After the release of Metal Gear Solid, Kojima barely let the ink on his script dry before getting to work on a sequel. Metal Gear Solid released in September of 1998 to great critical and financial success, and within 4 months, Kojima already had his plans for the follow-up set in stone, with the final draft of the design doc being completed in January of 1999. The team quickly got to work, and in a little under 3 years, Metal Gear Solid 2: Sons of Liberty would be released to the public. But after Metal Gear Solid pushed the boundaries of technical presentation, varied gameplay, and thematic storytelling in the gaming industry 3 years prior, would the sequel be able to live up to fans' expectations, or would it fall short of the original's legacy and become an ultimately forgettable experience? Well, let's talk about it. And before getting too far into the video, I should mention that this is the 6th in a series of videos where I'm playing every Metal Gear game for the first time and reviewing them as I go along in preparation for Metal Gear Delta. And while you don't have to have seen the rest of the videos in order to enjoy this one, you will be missing a lot of important context about my journey with those games if you haven't seen them. So I'll have the full playlist linked in the description below for those of you that want to go check those out first. But with that out of the way, Metal Gear Solid 2: Sons of Liberty is an action-adventure stealth game developed and published by Konami for the PlayStation 2 in 2001. The game opens 2 years after the events of Metal Gear Solid, with series protagonist Solid Snake being sent in to investigate the possibility of a new Metal Gear prototype that's allegedly being held on a US Marine tanker just off the shore of New York City. As Snake arrives on site, Revolver Ocelot from the previous game is shown to the audience in a helicopter watching him from a distance, hinting that the enemy was expecting Snake's arrival. We get a call from Otacon, who catches players up on what's been happening in the world of Metal Gear over the last 2 years since MGS1. Snake, after being labeled a terrorist by the United States government, started working with Otacon's new anti-Metal Gear organization Philanthropy after Ocelot sold the Metal Gear Rex data to whatever nations were willing to pay for it, leading to almost every military power having their own new version of Metal Gear. In the middle of our conversation, an unknown military force arrives on scene, killing the Marines on the tanker and taking over the ship. Snake notes that they seem to be Russian based on their uniforms and weapons before Otacon reminds us that we need to find the new Metal Gear prototype, so we get moving. And I've somehow managed to avoid it up to this point, but we need to talk about how insane the generational leap between the two games is here. I've said it in plenty of videos before, but the jump from PS1 to PS2 is probably the largest graphical increase in consoles that we will ever see, and the increase in fidelity from Metal Gear Solid 1 to Metal Gear Solid 2 is definitely a great example of that. It also helps that MGS2 just looks really good for its time. I mentioned earlier that this game came out in 2001, and that means that when we compare it to its contemporaries, we're looking at the other blockbusters of the time like Grand Theft Auto 3 and Halo Combat Evolved, and I shouldn't even need to sit here and describe to you how much better this game looks. But getting into the gameplay, there are a number of new mechanics that are introduced right off the bat. Easily the biggest addition is that of the first-person aiming mechanic. In Metal Gear Solid 2, not only can you look around environments in first person, but you can now also aim and fire your weapons from this viewpoint, allowing you to specifically aim for certain parts of the body in combat and stealth. This is immediately incentivized through another gameplay addition with the tranquilizer gun. This thing will knock guards unconscious, but how long it takes to do that after hitting them depends on where your shot hits. If you hit them in the body, it will take a few seconds before they actually get knocked out. If you hit them in the arm or the leg, it will take somewhere around 10 seconds, and if you hit them in the head, it will instantly knock the guard out. This makes almost no sense logically speaking, but in terms of encouraging more careful and high-skill gameplay, it really does add a fun dynamic to the game that wasn't there before. As well as that, there are some new traversal mechanics present here. The most important of these is the addition of a hanging mechanic, allowing you to jump over and hang from a railing in order to avoid detection. It seems really small when it's first introduced, but it really does get used a lot in this game, and in my opinion, it's really satisfying to use this to successfully evade a guard. The team also put a lot of effort into increasing the interactivity in the environment with this game. Things like having lockers all over the place that you can open to find items inside of, or even hide yourself inside of to avoid alerts, and some of them even come complete with materials. You can also use these lockers to hide the bodies of guards after you've taken them out, but I don't recall ever actually doing this myself as I didn't find it all that necessary, so I'm not sure if I'll have any footage of it. There are also some more context-sensitive things like doors, with you needing to manually open up pressure doors on the tanker, with spamming the button faster leading to Snake opening the door more quickly. And while it didn't happen for me during my playthrough, I've also heard that if you stay out in the rain for too long, Snake will actually catch a cold and sneeze, alerting any nearby guards to his presence. Another attention to detail thing that surprised me is that enemies now use radios rather than instantly raising an alert. When using the first-person aiming mode, you can even shoot out the radio to prevent them from calling backup, and beyond that, if a guard starts to call for backup but you take them out before they can actually finish the call, the enemy will still send a patrol to your location to investigate what's happening, giving you a limited window to escape in the event that this happens. But after getting to grips with the new gameplay additions, we make our way up to the bridge, finding a woman speaking on the radio. We overhear that her name is Olga and that she's the daughter of the commander of the enemy forces here on the ship, and he wants her to abandon the mission because she's pregnant and he wants nothing bad to happen to his grandchild. Snake then confronts her, leading to the first boss fight of the game. It's nothing all that complicated, being a simple cover-based shootout to get players more familiar with the first-person aiming, but there is one moment where Olga suddenly flips a light towards us to block our sight, requiring us to shoot it out to be able to see her properly again, so there's at least something to give this fight a little personality. After knocking her out, we get spotted by a surveillance drone, with Snake noting that it belongs to the army. Otacon then calls us, saying that the military force on the ship is allied with Ocelot, before explaining to us that the lead that sent us here wasn't secured through his normal means, but was instead sent in by an anonymous tip with only the initials EE to go on. Snake voices his concerns about this, but ultimately we still need to make our way to the bottom of the ship to find Metal Gear. And early on in the game, I had a bit of a difficult time adjusting to the new stealth mechanics. Sure, there were a lot more tools at my disposal, but the game had also been designed with all of those tools in mind, meaning that it wasn't necessarily easier to sneak around enemies in this game. And thanks to the addition of the tranquilizers, I was able to practice with these new mechanics without worrying about any horrible accidents.
Freeze.
Anyway, we finally get down to the hold, coming face to face with the Marine Corps' new Metal Gear prototype, Metal Gear Ray. We take a few pictures of it, sending them to Otacon remotely so that he can release them to the public, before Ocelot reveals himself to the Marines in the hold, telling them that he'll be taking Metal Gear Ray back from them. His Russian allies come in to back him up, before he reveals that he's not actually working with Russia, but in fact with a group known as the Patriots. One of his allies asks if he's still working with a man named Solidus before he shoots the commander in the chest, proceeding to gun down every Russian soldier in the room, and then detonating the Semtex bombs that he had placed around the ship. We run over to stop him from getting in Metal Gear before his right arm starts to freak out and he starts to talk exactly like Liquid Snake from the previous game, with him saying that he lives on through the arm that Ocelot replaced his old one with, which is apparently from Liquid's body that was recovered after the Shadow Moses incident. He then jumps into Metal Gear Ray, using it to cut a hole into the hull of the ship and managing to escape, leaving us in there to drown. We then cut to another 2 years later, with Roy Campbell briefing us on our new operation. A special forces group known as Dead Cell have taken over a large offshore decontamination plant called the Big Shell, which was built exactly where that tanker sank 2 years prior. If they aren't given their demand of $30 billion, they'll blow up the Big Shell plant, killing their VIP hostages along with it, with one of those hostages being the President of the United States himself. Once we're on site, Campbell also changes our codename as a precaution, telling us that instead of Snake, we'll be referred to as Raiden from here on out. But something about Snake seems off. Rather than shorter dark hair, Snake now has long blonde hair much like that of Liquid's. And beyond that, his voice sounds noticeably higher than it did during the earlier section of the game, and about 2 minutes after arriving at the plant, we come across a man who looks almost exactly like us going up the elevator, only making things that much weirder. Campbell then introduces us to the data analyst for this mission, a woman named Rosemary, who we've apparently met before. But weirdly, instead of calling us Snake or Raiden, she only ever calls us Jack, which is weird because at the end of Metal Gear Solid, Snake tells us that his name is David. And even beyond that, why are we working with Campbell and Foxhound again? Weren't we declared terrorists at the end of the last game, and wasn't that also the case for the first 2 hours of the game that we literally just played? Anyway, moving forward, Raiden takes the opportunity while riding up an elevator to finally remove the mask from his suit, revealing that we aren't playing as Snake at all. And while it's almost impossible to not know about this twist nowadays, this was a big deal back in 2001. Solid Snake had been the only character showcased in the trailers, featured in the cover art, really just promoted as the main character of the game at all. Kojima and his team intentionally pulled a bait and switch on fans, tricking them into thinking that they would be playing as Snake once again, because unless they were told otherwise, why would they not think that? Campbell then tells us that the terrorist group in the facility is known as the Sons of Liberty, and that their leader is none other than Solid Snake himself, hence why he changed our codename at the start of the mission. After this elevator ride, we're able to properly start exploring the big shelf for the first time, and I immediately come across one of my favorite details in this game. There are a lot of seagulls flying around the shell as we're out in the middle of New York Harbor, and if you happen to run through any of the bird poop that accumulates around the outside areas of the shell, you'll slip and fall. So there are some instances in this game where you can literally die from slipping in bird shit. Wonderful. As we continue forward though, we find a group of Navy SEALs being ambushed by Vamp, the first member of Dead Cell. He notices Raiden's presence, turning his attention to us before we're saved at the last second by a random soldier. Vamp disappears before quickly getting the drop on him, but we manage to grab the soldier's rifle and shoot at him. Vamp, however, manages to escape, leaving us to talk with the soldier who saved us, who introduces himself as Lieutenant Iroquois Pliskin of the Navy. He notices Raiden's suit, and he asks us if we're with Foxhound, and when we tell him that we are, he remarks that that's strange since he thought that Foxhound disbanded years ago. We explain to him that this is our first actual mission, with most of our training happening in VR, to which he scoffs at the idea of training soldiers through video games. We then mention that Solid Snake is supposedly the leader of the terrorists, to which he corrects us and says that Snake died 2 years ago after drowning in that oil tanker from the start of the game. We continue on to locate the hostages, and this is where one of the new additions to gameplay really makes itself known. As you explore the big shell plant, you'll notice that when you first enter a new area, you don't have access to your radar. This is because you need to find a computer node within that area to connect your radar to the map of the facility, meaning that you'll need to navigate through the plant blindly for a little bit before gaining that information advantage on your enemies. You'll never be without your radar for very long, thanks to these nodes always being placed relatively early on, but for the small amount of time that you have to make do without it, it really shakes up the gameplay and encourages players to be more careful in their approach, so I think it's an overall positive change. Back to the story though, we step outside to find a woman who seemingly can't be hit by bullets because of some mysterious field that seems to surround her, who also happens to have the president with her at the time. One of the SEALs nearby mentions that her codename is Fortune before she fires off a railgun at the SEALs firing on her, destroying the bridge leading to her and the president before simply walking away. Campbell then calls us, warning that the terrorists might try to blow up the plant in retaliation for the SEAL strike, which would ultimately release all the toxins and pollutants the plant cleans up back into the environment, so he tells us that we need to find the SEAL team's bomb disposal expert. Raiden then confronts Campbell, demanding to know who Dead Cell really is, saying that nothing happening around him feels real and it's like he's in a nightmare that he can't wake up from. Campbell simply assures him that what's happening is very real and that he needs to keep moving. We move forward, eventually finding Peter Stillman, an NYPD cop who got brought along with the SEALs as their bomb disposal expert. Stillman reveals that he's one of the greatest bomb disposal experts of all time, with one of his former students now being the explosives expert of Dead Cell, Fat Man. To this day, he regrets teaching Fat Man about explosives at such a young age, feeling as though he created a monster. He also mentions that an engineer was brought in with the SEALs as well, but he has no idea where he went. Raiden has no experience with bomb disposal, so Stillman teaches us how to simply freeze the detonators, allowing us to render them useless for at least 24 hours. He also slides us a level 1 keycard, allowing us access to more of the shell. After Pliskin leaves, Stillman notes that he doesn't believe that he's a SEAL or even a Navy man at all. He believes this because of Pliskin's use of various sayings that come from different militaries and branches, such as his use of the US Marine Corps' Semper Fi, noting that none of these sayings that he's used have actually come from the Navy. And this is probably a good time to bring this up, but playing this game nowadays, the facial animation can be a little uncanny at times. Not to say it is all the time, because sometimes the facial animation is actually quite good, but it definitely has its moments where it looks a little weird and unnatural. But considering the characters in this game have complex facial animations at all, that already puts the game above most of its contemporaries in that department.
Am I right, Marines? Sir, yes, sir! Damn right I am.
But as we go around freezing the explosives, we report back to Stillman after each one, and he starts to realize that the points Fat Man targeted in the shell wouldn't be effective if you were trying to destroy the plant, meaning there has to be some larger plan that we haven't thought of yet. Fat Man is supposed to be one of the greatest demolitionists of all time after all, so we aren't talking about some amateur who simply placed the bombs in spots where they aren't very useful. And as I was exploring the plant in its entirety to find these bombs, it really dawned on me just how much more interesting the visual design of the shell is compared to the Shadow Moses facility in MGS1. Not to say that Shadow Moses was ever uninteresting by any means, but the shell is just so much more unique than that ever was. The brighter colors used throughout the place really make it jump out and demand your attention, and the general design of the thing just feels so otherworldly. It doesn't look like anything we have in the real world, pulling me in and making me want to learn what's going on here even more. And the level design is an evolution over the previous game as well. Something that Kojima and the team wanted to do with MGS2 was add what they called a vertical tension to the gameplay. So to do this, they introduced multiple levels stacked on top of one another, as well as the ledge hang mechanic that I mentioned earlier, ultimately leading to a much more varied and interesting stealth experience than what was found in the previous game. Anyway, while searching for more explosives, we come across Olga from the tanker section of the game, who tells someone over the radio that she saw a cyborg ninja moving around the facility. We aim our gun at her, telling her to freeze, to which she simply does a flip over the railing, escaping from us instantly. We move on, defusing more bombs as we go, and after finding our 5th C4, Pliskin calls in telling us that he has found a large supply of explosives near the base of one of the shell's 2 cores, meaning that every last bomb we found up to this point was a decoy. However, the bombs Pliskin found don't use sensors, meaning that Stillman will have to go there and manually defuse them himself. Continuing on, we get an anonymous call warning us of claymores planted around the area of the shell we're in, with the caller telling us to call him Deep Throat, which Raiden quickly identifies as being from the Shadow Moses incident, before the caller quickly changes his mind and tells us to call him Mr. X. Raiden asks why the caller is helping him, to which Mr. X responds that he's just a really big fan of ours. And around this point in the game, I got the tranquilizer gun back, and while using it again, I learned that there were certain guards throughout the plant who will periodically radio in to report that there's nothing suspicious happening. So if you knock one of these guards out with the tranquilizer, the guy monitoring the radios will eventually realize that they haven't reported back in a while, and send an investigation team to make sure that they're okay. Yet again, this is a really cool detail that they've added here that adds a lot of depth to the stealth. Shortly after this, Pliskin calls in telling us that he's found the last bomb, and just as he's freezing it, Stillman yells at him not to, but it's too late, and once it's frozen, it activates a timer on the large bomb that Stillman was working on defusing. This causes Stillman to panic, and he sends us over to the other shell core to ensure that there aren't 2 of these larger bombs. We run there as quickly as possible before Stillman calls us back, telling us that the bombs are using a proximity trigger of 7 feet before it suddenly goes off, killing him. The other side of the plant takes massive damage, but we manage to defuse the bomb on our side, avoiding a complete catastrophe. Campbell then calls us, telling us that the terrorists have retaliated for our bomb defusal, shooting one of the hostages on the roof just to make sure it was seen by us, and stating that they'll be killing 1 hostage per hour every hour from now on until their demands are met. So with all the explosives dealt with, our objective shifts back to getting the hostages out of the plant safely, now with the added pressure of getting it done quickly so more of them don't get killed. As we're on our way back to the upper areas of the shell, Fortune ambushes us, saying that she was glad when she heard we weren't dead and daring us to finish her off just like we did to her father. This starts a boss fight in which we can't shoot back at her due to whatever field she has redirecting the bullets, and we need to avoid her railgun shots, which are slowly destroying the environment around us with each one. We run around helplessly for a while before Fat Man lets Campbell know that he's planted a bomb on the heliport and that he's demanding that we show up to defuse it. Vamp then comes down the elevator, telling Fortune that they've lost control of Fat Man and saying that he'll take over fighting us so that she can go and deal with it. Raiden then tries to take the opportunity while Fortune's back is turned to shoot her, but the bullet redirects from her, hitting Vamp in the head and killing him. Seeing this, Fortune breaks down crying, asking why she can't die and cursing her father. While this is happening, Raiden just slips by her and takes the elevator back up to the top, but just after we leave, Vamp reveals that he isn't actually dead, saying that he's died once already and he can't die again. We get to the heliport, defusing the bomb before being confronted by Fat Man. We tell him that if they destroy the shell, they'll never be able to collect their ransom, with Fat Man not knowing what we're talking about. He reveals that he only ever joined up with the plan to be able to beat Stillman, something that he's already accomplished, but since we defused his other large bomb, we are his next target, leading us into a boss fight with him. And Fat Man's fight is one of my favorites from the game. He zips around the arena on his roller skates, planting C4 at random points that you'll have to rush over to defuse before they can blow up the area. After doing this for a bit, one of two things will happen. He will either slip and fall randomly, giving you an opportunity to shoot him in the head, which is the only place where he's actually vulnerable to damage thanks to his large body armor, or he'll become aggressive and try to shoot you. So if he falls, you simply take the opportunity and get some damage, and he'll go back to planting bombs. But if he becomes aggressive, you're going to need to find a way to knock him off balance in order to get some damage and set him back to planting C4. I personally found that one of the easiest ways to knock him down was by using claymores, so it almost felt like the Vulcan Raven fight at times, with me trying to set up traps and outsmart my opponent. After we take him out, Pliskin calls in from the shell core where Stillman was taken out, and we ask him about the toxins, with him having no idea what we're talking about. He even says that he's never heard that destruction of the shell would produce any to begin with. He tells us that he can extract the hostages by chopper, but that he'll have to move quickly to secure one and get them out while the Harrier we saw in the heliport is still away. We ask him if he can fly a helicopter, and he tells us that he can't, but his partner that he came in with can, so he'll have to figure out where he went first. When we go to leave the heliport, the cyborg ninja that was mentioned earlier reveals himself, donning the exact same suit as Gray Fox did back in Shadow Moses. He tells us that he's the one known as Mr. X, and that he's here because he's a messenger of the Lali Lule Lo. He explains to us that we'll need to find a hostage named Ames, a Secret Service agent who will know where the president is, but Mr. X has no physical description of Ames to go off of. However, he does know that Ames is being held in the first of the two shell cores and that he has a pacemaker, so we can identify him with that if we use a microphone. He then casually mentions that the terrorists have a nuclear weapon with them and that they already have the code needed to detonate it. Raiden, confused by this, asks why they would bring a nuke here before Mr. X tells him that they didn't need to. He reveals to us that the big shell was never a decontamination plant, but instead it was a cover-up for the facility's real purpose, housing Metal Gear. Raiden, shocked by this, confronts Campbell about Metal Gear, and he's adamant that this is the first time he's ever heard about it, and that he'll have to look into it further. And now that we're a good ways into the game, we can talk about something that I've brought up for a few videos in a row now, that being the inventory organization. The game uses the same inventory system that MGS1 did, that being this scrolling side menu that opens without disrupting the gameplay, but rather than having one giant scroll wheel for weapons and one for items, there are now subcategories within each of them. These subcategories are placed in a vertical line, and once you're hovering over the category you want, you can scroll horizontally to get the exact item or weapon you want. This improves the navigation a lot compared to the previous game, and even though it still gets a little confusing and crowded by the very end of the game, it's a significant improvement and definitely deserves a mention here. Back to the story though, at this point I called Rose to save my game, but she ended up dropping a really interesting detail. She tells us that she found out where Solid Snake is buried, confirming that he is in fact dead. She mentions though that his right arm is missing, which as far as Raiden is concerned doesn't really mean much, but to us as players it's an immediate giveaway that the body that got buried was actually Liquid's, as we saw that Ocelot has his right arm near the beginning of the game, meaning that Solid Snake is still out there somewhere. Anyway, we sneak into the first shell core using a guard disguise, and when we get inside, we realize that the door to the hall with the hostages has a retinal scanner on it, so we use an enemy's eye to get us past the door. We use a directional microphone to find Ames, who says that he was sent in by the Lali Lule Lo just like us, before telling us that the president was moved to the first floor of Shell Core 2. We ask if we should be worried that the terrorists will shoot him like they did with the other hostages, to which he says that he has no idea what we're talking about. He explains to us that they can't afford to harm the president, as the system to verify a nuclear launch needs to check his vitals every hour to allow for a launch, before then explaining to us that the sinking of the tanker 2 years prior was all planned in order to construct the big shell facility for Metal Gear before Snake walks by in the hallway outside. He and Ocelot have a conversation in the hallway, which we listen into using a directional microphone. They talk about us, saying that we can't have been sent in by the US since Foxhound disbanded years ago, meaning we must have been sent in by the Patriots. Ocelot tells Snake that the Metal Gear unit is ready to fire before Olga comes in, confronting Ocelot about the cyborg ninja running around and accusing him of double-crossing them. Snake tells her not to cast suspicions so easily before dismissing her to go handle other things. Ames then explains to us that there was never a ransom demand from the Sons of Liberty, and that the goal the entire time has been to fire a nuke from Metal Gear. They plan to detonate the nuke at high altitude above New York City, wiping out all electronics in the city without destroying it so that they can form a new republic within it. Ocelot then walks over to us, revealing that he knows who Ames is, and he says that Ames was sent in to keep tabs on the president after they discovered that he planned to betray them. Ames then suddenly dies of a heart attack before Ocelot demands for us to take our mask off, revealing our identity, before Mr. X swoops in to secure our escape. After escaping, we confront Campbell about the fact that there was never a ransom to begin with, and he tells us that he's been kept in the dark up to this point as well, and that he can only relay to us what he's been told by the higher-ups, before reminding us that we need to secure the president before the terrorists can activate Metal Gear. And while on my way there, I stumbled upon one of the greatest discoveries of my playthrough. You no longer need to even have your keycard equipped to open doors that you have clearance for. I've talked about the keycard problem in every single video of the series since the first, and while things have gotten slightly better with almost every entry, now there is literally no complaint I could possibly have anymore. Even when I was trying to think of the smallest nitpick possible, that being that the keycard is still there in your inventory and taking up space on the scroll wheel, this at least makes it so that you can always check what level your card is in the event that you forget. So yeah, they've finally completely nailed the keycard system, and I have nothing bad to say about it anymore. Further along the way, Pliskin calls us saying that he secured an enemy chopper and that he and his partner are going to start taking trips to free the hostages, introducing us to his friend Otacon. The introduction gets cut short, however, with them getting shot at as they attempt to take off. Raiden calls Campbell about this, recognizing the name Otacon from the Shadow Moses incident, to which Campbell reassures him that Solid Snake and Otacon died 2 years ago, and even if they were alive, they became terrorists after the Shadow Moses incident anyway, so they wouldn't be helping us out here. Immediately after this, we come face to face with Snake, who does in fact introduce himself as Solid Snake, before Pliskin flies in yelling that he's not the real Solid Snake. Snake starts calling Pliskin his brother, saying that he's in a whole other league than Liquid ever was, before revealing himself to in fact be Solid as Snake, the secret third twin revealed in the post-credits scene of the previous game. Some crazy anime bullshit goes down as they fight, before Vamp suddenly appears in the Harrier we saw earlier, picking Solidus up. Pliskin tells us that there's no way their chopper can take out the Harrier, throwing us a Stinger missile launcher, leading to a boss fight with a Harrier jet rather than the series staple Hind fight. And this fight is pretty fun. It's essentially just the Hind fight from the previous game, but with some extra attacks and evasive maneuvers thanks to the Harrier's increased firepower and mobility. We eventually manage to shoot it down, but as the Hind crashes into the water, Metal Gear Ray suddenly launches out of the water to catch it before hitting the entire shell facility with an artillery barrage. Vamp then jumps out of the Harrier and, I shit you not, sprints across the water and then up the side of the shell to escape. After this, Raiden asks Pliskin if he's the Solid Snake, with him and Otacon then revealing who they truly are and telling Raiden that they fight to eradicate Metal Gear entirely. They also reveal to us that the terrorists have Otacon's sister somewhere in the shell, and that's part of the reason the two of them are here. And I know I talked a lot about this earlier, but I really do think that the art direction in this game is pretty fantastic. I already talked about how much I like the visual design of the shell, but I also think that the character design here is on another level, especially when it comes to Raiden and Snake themselves. Even though this was the team's first attempt at designing a look for Raiden, this is easily his most iconic look from the series, and for Snake, it says a lot that even though he has so many different designs throughout the series, whenever he appears in franchises outside of Metal Gear such as Super Smash Bros. Or even more recently, Fortnite, he's donning his Metal Gear Solid 2 look every single time. But back to the story, as we're entering Shell 2, we overhear a discussion between Olga and Solidus, with him telling her that Snake is in Shell 1, and with her saying that she's been waiting to get revenge on him for 2 years for what he did to her father. She's told to stay put and guard the president for another hour to ensure they can verify the launch, before they turn on the electrified floors in the hallway, blocking our entry to where the president is being held. We go swimming through the basement of Shell 2, which is now flooded due to the bomb that killed Stillman earlier, finding a Nikita missile launcher down here and using it to send a remote-controlled missile through the vents to disable the electronic floors outside of the president's cell. We meet up with the president, with him saying that he expected us to be sent in to kill him, not rescue him. He reveals to us that he was intending to work with the Sons of Liberty and that he wasn't originally a hostage of theirs. He explains that he's simply a public figurehead for the government and that he actually holds no political power at all. He then reveals to us that a group known as the Patriots are the real ones pulling the strings in the United States, and that he's simply the guy they put in front of the public to maintain the illusion. He tells us that he doesn't even know who the actual members of the Patriots are, and that all he's been told is that there are 12 men that make up something called the Wiseman's Committee, and that those are the men who truly make all of the decisions in the country. He was working with the terrorists in an attempt to pressure the Patriots into letting him join and become a king rather than a useless pawn, but Solidus wants to confront the Patriots instead, and so he's taken the president prisoner and kept him alive simply to fire the nuke from Metal Gear. He then explains that Solidus Snake was the president before him and the third of Big Boss's clones. The Shadow Moses incident 4 years prior was a result of Solidus going against the Patriots' plan while he was in office in an attempt to overthrow them. The Patriots then forced him to resign, and they were going to assassinate him shortly after, framing his death as a health failure, but he somehow managed to get away from them, leading to where we are now. He then drops the biggest bomb of all onto us. The Metal Gear Ray that we saw earlier is not in fact the new Metal Gear, but rather the big shell itself is the new weapon, Arsenal Gear. It's being protected by an array of mass-produced Metal Gear Rays, hence why we saw one jump out of the water earlier. He explains to us that Arsenal Gear was created in order to maintain the Patriots' control in the event of the one thing that they fear the most, the flow of digital information leading to their downfall. And finally, he tells us to find Emma Emmerich, the system programmer for Arsenal Gear, explaining that she's the only person who will be able to prevent Arsenal from bringing about a complete catastrophe. He then tries to force us to shoot him so that the terrorists can't authorize his launch code, before Ocelot suddenly shows up and shoots him in the chest before slipping away again. We then call Snake and Otacon, with them revealing that they've known about Arsenal Gear all along. We ask them what really happened during the tanker mission 2 years ago, with them explaining that the entire thing was a setup to stop their anti-Metal Gear activities, publicly frame Snake as a terrorist, and sink the tanker as a cover so that they could develop Arsenal Gear out here. There isn't much time to keep talking though, as we need to find Emma and prevent the activation of Arsenal Gear, so we move forward to find her. And this is a fairly small thing that I didn't even notice until this point in the game, but leveling up was completely removed from this entry. In the earliest entries, you would level up after rescuing enough hostages, increasing your ammo capacity and maximum health, before Metal Gear 2 changed it to give the player a buff after defeating each boss. But here, every item just has a set carrying capacity, and your maximum health is the same at the start of the game as it is at the end. Ultimately, I would like to say that I prefer having that small progression throughout the game, but since I didn't even notice it until I was this far in, I guess it can't really be that big of a deal, so I won't hold it against MGS2. Otacon then calls to warn us that with all the flooding, extracting Emma from the lower levels of Shell 2 may be a problem because of an accident when she was younger where her father drowned and she almost drowned with him. After this, she was never able to swim again and has developed an extreme fear of water. And just to point out the obvious, yes, Emma and Otacon do share a last name, and that's because Emma is the sister who was mentioned earlier in the game. Moving further into the core though, we come across Vamp, who is literally meditating while sitting on the fucking water when we arrive. He explains to us that even if they can't fire a nuclear bomb, Arsenal is still equipped with a hydrogen bomb, meaning that an effectively nuclear threat still exists even without the president. During our conversation, the facility's computer system announces that Arsenal has become active before Vamp suddenly attacks us. And this is my least favorite boss fight in the game, although I don't think I fully understood the mechanics of it, so take all of this with a grain of salt. Vamp moves too quickly to effectively fight with bullets, but I found that explosives will have an easy time dealing with him thanks to the splash damage, so the grenade launcher quickly became my best friend here. Even with this though, he either swims through the water, bounces around on the railings on the upper floors, or drops down to slowly walk towards you, and I was only able to consistently damage him while he was walking on the same floor as me, so it really felt more like a drawn out waiting game than anything else, and I found it pretty dull. We take him out, moving on to find Emma, but right as we do, the place starts flooding with water. Raiden talks her into facing her fears in order to survive, and we manage to get her out before she explains to us that Arsenal gear also functions as an information control center that's meant to help maintain the Patriots' control over society. It comes equipped with an AI that will allow them to control the flow of classified information, regulating what the public does and doesn't know, not just automatically, but flawlessly. The program that she wrote, GW, is this AI and was created to censor any information from the public that would be inconvenient to the Patriots, and Arsenal gear was only ever created in order to protect GW, rather than act as a weapon itself. She hands us a disk loaded with a virus that the Patriots asked her to create that will effectively disable GW in the event they ever lose control of it, meaning we can use that virus to wipe the thing out. While escorting Emma to Arsenal gear, we find a bridge that's too unstable to cross together, leading to this really fun sniper segment where we and Snake cover her from opposite ends of the path. This is one of those moments, much like the ones in Metal Gear Solid 1, where you just get to do something entirely unique that completely shakes up the gameplay for a few minutes before you go back to the normal sneaking thing. Just as she's getting near the end though, Vamp leaps in out of nowhere, capturing her. We manage to shoot him off of her, but it turns out that she was stabbed during the exchange, and Snake runs out to rescue her. He calls us after we enter the shell again, telling us that the wound is pretty bad and that we need to hurry and get the disc over to them as soon as possible just in case. We get to them, and Snake tells us that he thinks Vamp hit some internal organs because they can't get the bleeding to stop. She set everything up to upload the virus while we made our way over there though, so we slot the disc in and the virus gets blocked while we upload it, getting stuck at 90%, but Snake tells Otacon to lie to Emma and let her die thinking she prevented a disaster. She bleeds out on the floor of the computer room, and Otacon makes some revelations that are way outside the scope of this video. The computer system then announces that the upper shell is going to be cut off from Arsenal prior to its activation, and Otacon goes to save the hostages while Snake and Raiden go together to take out Solidus. After Otacon leaves though, Snake reveals that he and Mr. X have been working together the whole time, before it's revealed that Mr. X has been Olga all along. Olga then electrocutes Raiden with her blade, knocking him out. We wake up captured by Solidus and Ocelot, with Ocelot saying that they've checked our DNA against every known database, but they couldn't find anything about who we are. However, Solidus reveals that he knows exactly who we are, calling us Jack the Ripper, before revealing that we were one of the child soldiers that he raised to fight wars for the US. We earned the nickname Jack the Ripper because of how proficient of a killer we were at such a young age, being the greatest child soldier that Solidus had ever produced. We don't remember this because after the Patriots took us in, they wiped our memories so that we would have no recollection of it. Ocelot then tells us that we're inside of Arsenal gear, and more specifically, within the memory of Shadow Moses. Olga walks in, speaking to us through nano communication, revealing that she was sent by the Patriots to support us in our mission. She explains that her child is being held hostage by the Patriots to force her to cooperate with them, and that we're both being used as pawns in something called the S3 program. Olga leaves to find a way to release us, and Rose calls asking if what Solidus said was really true and we were really a child soldier of his. Raiden explains that even though his memory was manipulated, he has nightmares about it every night that have slowly given those memories back to him. He then comes to the realization that he was chosen for this mission because the Patriots knew that no one could take Solidus down except for him. Olga releases us from holding, with Campbell telling us that we need to eliminate Solidus and recover Arsenal gear intact. Raiden confronts him, asking if he's working with the Patriots, which Campbell denies. But Raiden continues to push, mentioning that the two of them have never even met in person, so he's not sure if he can even trust him, before Campbell tells us that we need to just play our role and finish the mission. As we move forward to find our gear, we continue to get a series of increasingly bizarre calls from Campbell and Rose.
Raiden, turn the game console off right now.
What did you say?
The mission is a failure. Cut the power right now.
What's wrong with you?
Don't worry, it's a game. It's a game just like usual.
You'll ruin your eyes playing so close to the TV.
What are you talking about?
Raiden, something happened to me last Thursday when I was driving home. I had a couple of miles to go. I looked up and saw a glowing orange object in the sky to the east. It was moving very irregularly. Suddenly, there was intense light all around me, and when I came to, I was home. What do you think happened to me?
Huh?
Fine. Forget it. Infiltrate the enemy fortress, Outer Heaven. Destroy the final weapon, Metal Gear. I hear it's amazing when the famous purple stuffed worm in Flapjaw space with the tuning fork does a raw blink on Harry Carey rock. I need scissors. 61.
And beyond that, I also start getting some strange glitches, like this video of some random Japanese woman replacing my radar screen. But Snake eventually finds us in a random hallway, bringing us our gear and explaining that he and Olga used us as bait to gain access to Arsenal gear. He also hands us Olga's sword, saying that he was told to give it to us. The sword is really fun, albeit a bit janky. To emulate the feeling of actually slashing the sword, the designers made it so that you can attack with it by flicking the right stick in certain directions, and while it's honestly kind of fun, it definitely lacks some polish and execution. Otacon calls, letting us know that he managed to get all the hostages out safely, and we tell him about the weird calls from Campbell, with him saying that he'll look into it. We and Snake fight our way through a small army of guards, and Otacon calls us back, saying that the origin of the signal from Campbell is actually coming from within Arsenal, and that its encryption is actually the exact same as the signals coming from GW. Continuing forward, we get a call from Campbell telling us that they've taken Rose hostage, with Snake telling us to snap out of it and not listen to him. Raiden then starts to consider the possibility that Rose never actually existed, and that all of his memories with her were fabricated by whatever AI he's been speaking with throughout the mission. Eventually, we come across Fortune, and Snake stays behind to fight her, telling us to go on ahead. We climb up the ladder into Arsenal's core, hearing the voice of Solidus. He explains to us that the S3 program stands for the Solid Snake Simulation Program. We were trained using VR missions of Solid Snake's most extreme missions, including things like the Shadow Moses incident and the Tanker mission, in order to create a soldier that perfectly replicates Solid Snake so that the Patriots would have someone of that skill level to carry out their dirty work. He then attacks us with a small army of Metal Gear Rays, which leads to a pretty fun, albeit very simple boss fight. We need to dodge the weapons fire from the Metal Gears while occasionally taking the chance to fire a stinger back at them, and after we take down roughly 5 of them, Olga swoops in out of nowhere, saying that she'll hold them off while we move forward, before Solidus reappears, swiftly grabbing her with one of his robotic arms and shooting her in the head. He then challenges us to another fight before GW goes completely out of control due to the virus we partially uploaded earlier, turning the Metal Gear Rays on him. Solidus quickly wipes out the Metal Gears and captures us just before Fortune appears with a captive Solid Snake and we pass out. We wake up to find ourselves tied up on top of Arsenal gear, with Solidus attempting to choke the information out of us. Fortune tells Solidus that she has some business to attend to before Solidus accuses her of attempting to betray him and steal Arsenal gear for herself. She admits to it, and he explains that he knew and he had planned to let them have Arsenal gear all along, revealing that he only ever wanted to get the real names of the Patriots themselves. If GW is set up to censor any info related to them, it has to have their names buried somewhere inside of that to know what to censor, so he's been using Dead Cell all along to secure Arsenal and GW. Ocelot then walks in laughing, telling Solidus that everything so far has been scripted by himself and the Patriots, and it was all orchestrated to create the perfect VR training exercise for the S3 program. Every last bit of what happened that day, even including Fat Man's rebellion, was all thoroughly and carefully planned out by them. The one exception to this was the appearance of the real Solid Snake, with Ocelot and the Patriots not knowing how he managed to catch wind of all this and actually show up. As Solidus and Fortune are struggling to come to the realization that this is true, he shoots Fortune in the chest, revealing that she never had any powers or superhuman abilities at all, and that the Patriots had simply shielded her with an electromagnetic field to give her that illusion. She musters up enough strength to shoot him with her railgun, but Ocelot has the same tech that she did protecting him, deflecting the shots. He jumps into a Metal Gear Ray, revealing that now all he has left to do is clean up and bring the data back to the Patriots. He tries to launch a barrage of missiles at us to wipe us all out, but Fortune steps back in and manages to redirect them all, proving to Ocelot and the Patriots that they can't control everything before dying from blood loss and exhaustion. Then, just as Ocelot goes to kill Snake, his right arm acts out again, with Liquid taking control of his body. He reveals that he's been inside of the arm the entire time, just waiting for the perfect moment to awaken and take control again. He explains that he was the one who leaked the info to Snake and Otacon to bring them out there, so that Snake could free him and set up his plan to take down the Patriots. He then declares that there's only room for one Snake before Snake frees himself from his handcuffs, chasing Liquid into the water. Arsenal then accelerates, crashing into New York City's Federal Hall, with us and Solidus surviving, but falling onto the roof of that building. Solidus then monologues to us about how life is short and how our purpose while still alive is to pass things down to the next generation after us. He says that the passing of the torch from parent to child is more than just DNA, but information and beliefs as well, and that's why he has to take down the Patriots. We then suddenly get a call from Campbell where he completely drops the facade, explaining everything. He and Rose reveal that they were in fact GW the entire time, and that the Patriots aim to control the flow of information in order to ensure the future of humanity, saying that the average human is not worthy of the privilege of free will, and that it will eventually destroy humanity as a whole. They aim to fill the role of humanity's guardians, ensuring that only the information that will lead to a prospering society is allowed to reach the broader public. They then reveal that S3 doesn't stand for Solid Snake Simulation, but rather Selection for Societal Sanity. The Shadow Moses and Big Shell incidents were exercises to ensure that even in the most extreme circumstances, the Patriots would be able to maintain the facade and therefore the structure of society. We're then demanded to kill Solidus, with Raiden asking why he would do that, and GW tells us that if we die, both Olga's child and the real Rosemary will be killed. Solidus, feeling our hesitation, tells us that he was the one who killed our parents before taking us in as a child soldier, demanding us to face our past and free ourselves. This leads to the final boss of the game, a sword fight with Solidus Snake on the rooftop, and this is also my favorite boss fight in the game. It isn't all that special mechanically, but thanks to what this fight means in the scope of the story, it easily stands out as the most memorable of the game for me personally. We get a call in the middle of the fight, with GW reminding us what's at stake if we fail to kill him. Raiden retorts that the two of them aren't just pawns to be used by them, and GW argues that that's exactly what they are, even explaining that the name Raiden was selected because it was the name of a Japanese fighter plane in World War II, one that the US forces back then also referred to as Jack. Our entire life was planned by the Patriots from the beginning, and we were selected as one of their weapons before we were even born. Raiden never, at any point in his life, had free will of his own. But eventually, we managed to defeat Solidus, with him accepting his fate, allowing himself to fall from the rooftop, bringing an end to the Big Shell incident. In the aftermath, Snake finds us, revealing that he still has the virus disk made to erase all info on the Patriots from GW, meaning that if we break down the code, we'll be able to extract all of that info from the parameters. He leaves, and as we watch him disappear, we notice the real Rosemary standing there. Raiden and Rose get their happy ending, and after the credits, we get one final speech from Snake to drive home the game's central themes. It further pushes one of the central themes from MGS1 that there's so much more to life than what's in our DNA. What's more important is our own experience with the world, other people, art, and how we pass those things on to the next generation. Snake, effectively being a stand-in for Kojima himself here, states that the digital age makes that easier to do than ever, and that the human race will come to an end someday, but we still need to leave what traces of life behind that we can, both building the future and preserving the past. And then, just when it seems like the game is over, we get one last call from Otacon.
Snake, you there? It's me. I've finished going over that disc.
Did you find the Patriots list?
Of course. It contains the personal data of 12 people. There was a name on it. Snake, it was one of our biggest contributors.
What's going on around here?
I don't know.
Anyway, where are they?
Well, we were right about them being on Manhattan, but
But what?
they're already dead. All 12 of them.
When did it happen?
Well, about 100 years ago.
What the hell?
Overall, at the risk of dropping whatever illusion of professionalism I have left, I fucking loved Metal Gear Solid 2. It takes what I loved about Metal Gear Solid and just further improves on every bit of it. The gameplay, the overly dramatic storytelling, the meaningful themes that can be applied to just about everyone, it's all still here and just better than ever. The game still has its issues to be sure, but this is easily one of my favorite games that I've played in a while, and potentially even one of my new favorite games of all time. So at the end of the day, I'm going to give Metal Gear Solid 2: Sons of Liberty a 9.6. Hey guys, thanks for sticking around for the whole video. Real quick, I want to give a huge thanks to all of my patrons. You guys keep the show running, and that's legitimately amazing. If any of you watching would also like to help support the channel extra, consider checking out my Patreon as well. If you can't or don't want to contribute, don't worry, because the fact that you watched all the way to this point already goes a long way. I mean, seriously, thanks to any of you who managed to watch this thing all the way through. It got way longer than I ever intended for it to be. It was a massive effort to get this done in such a short amount of time. My voice is even a little busted after recording that whole script, but I'm glad that you guys enjoyed it. If you're looking for the rest of my Metal Gear reviews, you can find them right here, and maybe you'd even be interested in another series we've been doing covering the Ace Combat games. But with all that said, I'll see all of you right here for the next Metal Gear review.